All right, we can unmute ourselves now. Hi, Wayne. Hi, Kris.
How are we doing, guys? All right.
Good, you?
Not too bad.
Good day, everyone.
Welcome, Kris.
Thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Just give me a sec as I kind of quickly recap that. Wow. Okay, so I got to say that one was a little bit drier than the last witness that we had before him. It was a little bit drier, but we're seeing some more finger pointing and butt covering. It's very clear. I'm not seeing this witness be as aggressive as the last ones when it comes to the OPP's position that the OPS was not doing a very good job. However, he is not being gentle either. He is being clear that there was meetings for meetings and no clear command structure, no clear person in charge. So, yeah, it's quite the mess. And we had a small little conversation there in the chat about whether or not are they kind of setting up for the OPP to start having new rights and new powers in order to take over when a city is not functioning well. I'm very concerned if that it becomes a recommendation and becomes a reality, because I'm quite pleased with the OPP so far. However, who makes that call? Who's the one that says, okay, enough is enough? Provincial police come in, and I can only assume that if that situation did arise, it would be without the consent of the city police, because that would be the only situation where they would have to come in without to use that new law. Because all the other situations, it would be with consent and by request. So the city would be asking for the assistance. So they've done that a few times in the last few days where they said things like, hey, OPP, why didn't you tell OPS what to do? Why didn't you guide them on where they should block roads within the city? Stuff like that. And are you seriously asking a higher police force to take your jurisdiction away from you? It's incredible to me. I'm in shock that any city would even imply that they think a higher government should come and tell them what to do, unless they want a top-down government, because that's exactly what that would be setting up. So I'm resisting that a little bit because I think that would be dangerous. I don't know who calls it, and I think it would be resisted by the police force. So that's my thoughts on that. Kris, you jumped into the chat and you saw some of that, and what do you think?
Well, I think it's telling at this point where, I'm surprised, honestly, like just for a general recap of because I've been on and off. I'm thankful that you're able to do this because I haven't been able to keep up and watch every minute of it. But it's surprising. Not really surprising the blame game is happening, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Is the recommendations that come out, you have to be extremely careful as far as the power grabs that we've seen throughout the process. Even just when the Emergencies Act was put in Freeland, all of a sudden some of these FinTrack stuff's now permanent. The centralization of power, I fully agree with you that I can't see any city. Why would they want to change it? If a city's in a desperate need, they put a request in, they take a look at the format what the needs are and deploy the resources, but you still have the command structure coming from the local city. It makes no sense that they would want to have anyone come in and usurp their power or lose control. That's not what the people who live in the city don't pay for that, right? They want to have their own people, and those relationships that are built oftentimes through police forces allow them to have a better understanding of the ground as well too. So that if you remove that connectivity, you can have a little bit more of a detachment from what the needs are. So it's interesting they're going this way. It's with what we've seen so far come out. Especially with intelligence officer Morris and other things that we've seen, that everything is a distraction now, outside and away from this. Right now, Trudeau's out there. He's making more announcements on handgun control and stuff, but that's literally just a press conference he held. But seeing the press gallery yesterday, not even full, there's 2 or 3 people there. So what I think that the takeaway from it, regardless of what the recommendations are, is in real time, we're able to use these tools to kind of counter narrative. And it's become very, very hard for anybody out there in the social media world to defend the positions of actually in enacting this on the public. Every piece of the information so far. And so they're going to keep trying to throw each other under the bus as much as possible, and then see where the public will settle on who's the name. Is it Mendocino? Is it because if Trudeau was going to go, there's already enough out there. There's no point in sticking around, and then if that happens, we get Freeland for a while, and a lot of people could argue that we already have Freeland. as far as the brains behind all this is happening. But I do like it. I'm surprised that there's been as much honesty coming from the OPP. I don't have a lot of faith in. I come from the work I came from is all directed by you can't give up faith in the system. It's Kafka-esque. You got to keep going, even with the news we got about Petford's case. It's expected, right? And then you go right into the appeals, and then you just got to keep soldiering forward. So I see this as a benefit for us to at least be able to show the world that I don't buy the Keystone Cop thing at all. I don't. It makes no sense, right? Especially when the negotiations were going on, and so there was no clear. If you're talking, someone who's done negotiations, mediations, and crisis management before, if you are in dialogue, you don't escalate behind the scenes, and you don't come in with your horses and everything else and freezing the bank accounts when you have dialogue. And so to me, it seemed more like that's the political side. Peaceful protest is allowed in this country, and if you were ever to look at an example of what a peaceful protest is, that's historic. And so I think the frustration was, wherever the pressure's coming from, was get it done and get it over with. And now scrambling back through everything, they're looking at it, and no one wants to accept responsibility, right? They're just saying, and you get the guy, I'll keep coming back to Morris. Morris should have ended Trudeau and Mendocino and Dan Freeland, but we have to stare. And it's like that. Everyone gets excited. Oh, this is it. Well, how many times has that happened over the past couple of years, right? Something comes out and everyone gets excited and it's ignored, right? So you just got to keep building that data. And so I think it's going to get even more interesting starting next week. But as far as what I'm seeing so far, the honesty is surprising. So I'm impressed with the lawyers. If this is the best the government has, then wow. It's just progressively. This is usually you get this kind of stuff on Cross and other things, but you don't have them volunteering. So it gives me hope that you don't have that all-encompassing power as far as if everyone came out with saying the exact same thing and sticking to a script, and CBC was just covering. They're trying, but that's not happening. And so they just have, they're doing everything now. You'll have all these announcements and all this kind of stuff. And it's most likely, even if they have to have an election sooner than later, just to get this off the table, because it's only going to get progressively worse. That's my thoughts of things so far.
I agree. And I think Morris dug a really big hole for Trudeau. And now what we're going to see is Trudeau's trying to stack bodies on top of bodies so he can climb out of that hole by the time he takes a stand. It's a very deep one, so he's going to be walking all over people sacrificing themselves all the way up, because they're not even being shy about how incompetent and disorganized they have been. Diane Deans, I think it is, she just let the cat out of the bag. She secretly recorded the mayor. In that recording, it was her notice to the mayor that she replaced the chief. That was the first time the mayor even knew that the chief was being replaced. But she told him, all right, I replaced the chief. And if you listen to that phone call and you pay attention to what may have been happening legally, she was honeypotting him. She was trying to get him to take the bait of freaking out on her for doing that. He handled it well. And then inside of that phone call, she said, hey, am I going to face a no confidence vote here? So the cover your ass was happening real time on that one.
Yeah.
And then when the recording was played in court or at the hearing, she felt like she was not victimized. She was vindicated, that she had the magic bullet. But if you listen to it, it sounded to me like a desperate person who was trying to trap somebody, and she doesn't even realize how bad she comes off on it. And then she just went and had a testimony about, yeah, I know I wasn't sure if I was going to be targeted for it. I don't have to give the mayor. Hello, Andy Lee. I don't have to give the mayor a notice or anything. And yeah, and then that's where she left that recording. And I found that weird, because all official meetings, they definitely will have recording equipment. If this is meant to be officially recorded, it's going to be officially recorded. But she's using her cell phone, a personal cell phone, to do that. So there's something behind that. I would like to say hello to Andy Lee. Hi. Lots of Twitter hearts and stuff back and forth. So it's great to finally get you here, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great.
I don't know where my little contact is on Twitter, so I'm going to keep that conversation going with them to see if we get them to join us. But have you been watching the inquiry, Andy?
As much of it as I can. I hadn't watched as much this morning, just because I've been in and out. But yeah, so maybe if you guys can catch me up if I've missed anything. But it's been pretty fascinating so far. The levels of dysfunction are. It's hard to fathom what would happen if we ever actually had a national security issue.
Exactly.
Right.
Right. So I think Pat Morris's testimony was probably the most explosive and probably the least covered. But some really interesting gems coming out with Abram yesterday about the dispute that was going on between OPP and OPS as to how to handle the protesters. And obviously they had very, very different approaches that they wanted to take. The OPP seemed like they wanted to take a less heavy-handed approach and try to go more for the negotiation route. And that was obviously blocked by OPS. So really, really fascinating to see what was unfolding behind the scenes this whole time that we didn't know about.
Yeah, and the wording that they use, the language that they use, they're talking about enemies, and they're talking about dehumanizing. They're talking about taking away supplies. We had someone in our chat remind us that that's against international rules. You cannot, even if they are protesters, they're protected persons under the Geneva Convention. So you're not allowed. Yeah, you're not allowed to even interfere with supplies. So bragging about how they try to stop even the fuel tanks, that's it's against conventions, people. And let's be real. What are we talking about? We're talking about the energy source for heating of a vehicle in winter during a protest for a human. This is what we're talking about. We're not talking about some rogue state that kind of came into Canada to try and cause problems. We're talking about Canadians who traveled across the country to have their voice heard. It's shocking to me that the language that they're using. Yeah, that's the language that they're using. So
they were really necessities of life at that point, right? I mean, I don't know how many of you guys actually attended the protest, but I mean, it was dreadfully cold. Like it was unbearably cold. We relied on those fires and things like that. And I was probably in every single one of those trucks at one point warming up.
Oh, wow.
To charge my batteries. So it wasn't just seizing fuel. It was seizing necessity of life at that point, I think. And yeah, it was pretty shocking to hear how OPS was sort of skirting the OPP and planning to do these snatch and grabs and these arrests. I wasn't aware of that at the time, that they were, planning that sort of thing at Coventry.
Yeah, we had great testimony yesterday, specifically on that one, Andy, where they kind of set up the protesters. So the police liaison teams for the OPP were in great conversation with the group at Coventry, and they were going to negotiate the removing of fuel. It was a safety concern. The fire department came in. They all agreed, let's move this fuel. So we heard testimony yesterday from the OPP that during that movement of fuel is when the OPS decided to cancel that and then arrest them all as they left Coventry. And that killed all of the trust that was going on with the PLT teams, both OPP and OPS, with the convoy. And now we see the city come out with stats saying, hey, we arrested a bunch of people during this event. But they're also including things like that, where they set people up, caught them on the street after they left the area, and arrested them against the agreement of moving. Hi, Joe. Welcome back. Of moving the fuel. So we saw things like that. And I think that kind of behavior is like a tactic. They're trying to use tactics to get numbers for arrests. They're trying to provoke. They're likely trying to get the convoy side to get incredibly upset and lose all trust with OPP's PLT team. And as we know, OPP's team is fantastic across the province. They're dealing with protests all the time, various types, short ones, long ones. We keep hearing about city of Ottawa not having resources, but yet here's a fantastic resource who not only could have taken over all of PLT communication, they likely would have resolved it. Wayne, you're from the UK, so you're watching this with a different lens from outside of Canada. How does this look to you with your impression of Canada before? And are we looking weak here? Can a rogue state decide to plan this weekend to get about a bunch of trucks, some horns, a roasted pig, and go ahead and take over Ottawa? Is that the impression we got now?
Yeah, it's absolutely shocking, wasn't it? I mean, I remember seeing when I was on Twitter last year, seeing the protests and everything that was going on. And you're basically just fighting for the right to live, because of what they were trying to put on you. And so trying to stay warm, trying to eat was just a basic right. To take that away from you because you're having too much fun on your bouncy castle, it's just mean, isn't it? It's before it got brutal, it was just bullying, wasn't it? And then it turned nasty, it really did. And they're just trying to criminalize everything. So watching some of this on this inquiry is very interesting because so far you're hearing so many different points of view and just a little bit I've caught today. Yeah, you're getting a totally different point of view. This was the OPP guy, and he was just trying to be very fair and not paint things too bleak, whereas he's been barraged by questions trying to lay blame at anybody's door. So, yeah, they've all got different points of view.
Yeah,
You see what's trying to head.
yeah, and it bothered me seeing their tactical layout for their plan. And one of the major bullet points was fuel, funds, fun. And then inside the brackets, they said online fundraising. Then they said bouncy castle, hot tubs, dancing, and parties. It's like, wow. Yeah, no, strategically, you're going to war with your enemy because they have fun as one of the agendas that you want to get rid of. And let's face it, Andy, you were there. The whole purpose of fun was to move, enjoy, and it was a good atmosphere. This was not a hostile atmosphere. Have some fun, dance, enjoy yourself, meet people. So, Andy, going forward, do you think the U.S. military needs to get a bouncy castle force going, because this is now a strategic weapon for many states to use against Canada and maybe other countries?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's definitely changed the face of how we're going to protest. I mean, we saw that because I went down to the Rolling Thunder and I marched with James Top as well. I did my own farmers protest and brought some large farm equipment to Edmonton as well in the fall. And so, they're definitely better prepared now. They're not allowing us to approach the downtown area and things like that. We actually had a chopper on us when we were bringing the farmer to Edmonton. So, I think it's definitely changed the way that we police and protest and things like that, unfortunately. And of course, I did threaten to camp on Parliament Hill on Canada Day, and that caused quite an overreaction. The police actually made their headquarters in my hotel. I messaged them on Twitter. Yeah, they ran their operations out of my hotel because as soon as I got to my hotel on Canada Day, I was like, why are there so many police here? And then they actually had their headquarters set up on the second floor of my hotel. So I dropped by and said hi. I said, don't worry, we come in peace. Don't get your undies in a bundle. We're going to do our Canada Day thing and then we're going to leave. So don't freak out. I did end up pitching a tent. Bylaw came and got me, but I did finally manage to get a tent up, late in the evening on Canada Day. Bylaw came down and said, we've been waiting for you. Take it down. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to snap a picture of it first. So it's really, really changed the way. And, we've got this real overreaction of whenever there's a protest, there's a lot of, logistics and planning and a lot of resources that go into manage these demonstrations now. So it's really, really unfortunate, I think, because I think it's restricted to a degree our right to protest, when they have to corral us into places and things like that. I mean, I think it's really unfortunate that there wasn't more collaboration at the beginning of the truckers convoy between OPP, because I do think that we could have, that first weekend when we rolled in, I do think that we could have organized the trucks in a fashion so that we knew that there was always a clear route, so that full streets didn't get blockaded off, and we didn't get that gridlock situation. And, that was all stuff that could have been done ahead of time to make sure that there was a more peaceful coexistence from the start. And I just don't buy that, they didn't see us coming and all that. That was nonsense. I met the trucker convoy here in Calgary. I think it was January 20. I want to say it was 23rd.
Okay.
Or in and around there. And after that, I did an interview with Western Standard, and they said, because I just wanted to get a feel of the numbers. There was a couple of hundred of us at that point, and I was just like, no, there's not 50,000 of us. That was the rumor going around, but it's not a fringe minority, and it doesn't matter if there's 2,000 or 200. Right now, we have enough people to gridlock the city and shut the city down. That's the number. So that was well aware, a week out. Like I was like, it doesn't matter. And this is only one leg of the convoy. So right now it's already big enough to shut the city down. So the city should prepare themselves. And, I had senators and MPs that liked that tweet. So they were
Right.
all well aware that this was coming. So, I think it was really a strategic failure from the start. And I think it was set up maybe to a degree to fail. I think that they wanted us to come in, make a scene, misbehave, sort of be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Hmm.
Be all those nasty things that they said about us. But unfortunately, we behaved ourselves for the most part, and that didn't happen. And then they got themselves into the situation where, they had to sort of, enact this War Measures Act against, super peaceful, silly protests. And it was just, the more people that joined in, the sillier it got, right? We just tried to make an entire farce of it.
Yeah.
And that was part of the purpose of it, was to ridicule the government, right? It was also against mandates and vaccines, but it was also, I think a lot of people just showed up because they wanted to ridicule the government, right? They wanted to ridicule all this rhetoric that they've been fighting against for a couple of years. So yeah, but it's definitely changed, the way that we police and protest in Canada. And I think that's unfortunate that, that had to come about.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point there. And Kris, I'm going to turn to you on this next question. How are protests going to change across Canada? First Nations, pipelines, etc. Are they going to be impacted and affected as well? So are we going to see BC making changes? Is this going to be a nationwide recommendation coming out for protests and limitations? Kris, what do you think? First Nations, pipelines, all the other protests that we enjoy in Canada and have, what do you think is going to be changing there?
Well, I think that's the scary part as far as what the final recommendations are, and what the final language of the document is. For me, it's that's where you look at the left-right paradigm. I don't think it's obviously not a good thing. I mean, most of what I've seen the government do was, like Andy, like they expected and they wanted chaos just to justify the ability to use. So they start agitating and agitating. And like I mentioned before, if you're engaged in dialogue and still come in that you don't talk to the people, but you have the federal government coming over your shoulder with the hammer, with where we see all of the rhetoric going in regards to natural resource development and things, I think that it's unfortunately, 2 years from now, if Poilievre wins, I think he's going to take a much more aggressive, if these powers remain, if he's got this ability when those protests start again, this precedent has been set. And so I think that when the left, and I don't like to say the left, because each group has their grievances and there's multitude of characteristics to it. But when you see how the difference between when we had blockades and stuff and we didn't have this usage, right? And then you have fun being trampled because it's politically improper. And you also have the situation where that conflict that comes from the ideology, right? I mean, some First Nations, to me, I've been around both, where I've worked with First Nations that are totally opposed to pipelines, and I've worked with First Nations that are it's their only way to get out of poverty, unless you want to grow a ton of weed, and I encourage that. But there's not much opportunity, and so when you have that exploitative dynamic of big business, you've got government, you've got opposing ideologies, and if you have a conservative government that comes in and is very pro-resource development, which I am a fan of, as long as it's done responsibly. I think we should be energy independent, doing what we can to maximize that without long-term negative impacts. But I think that it's going to be a rude awakening for a lot of people that cheered this on the left when they decide they want to stand up. And it's going to be difficult. And with First Nations, and in BC, it's a bit different because First Nations have had success in the courts with regards to sovereignty. So other provinces are treaty based and stuff, and that didn't happen here. So there is more legal arguments that are going to be made with Nisga'a and Chilcote and having success. And BC is very much wanting to implement the United Nations Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So there's a whole bunch of different dynamics coming together, and I think that the first test will be any projects restarts. Alberta will be different, but I think that you're probably going to see a lot of conflict in BC come time for the next Conservative government if they want to try and work with it. We're stuck in BC. We don't have much outside of timber, and when I see what they're cutting down with the old growth forests and how they've handled those protests and the different approaches, it is it's tenuous. So I'm hoping that whatever comes out of this, and that's the problem. If we had a judiciary, or if we had, this is just a hearing, right? I mean, the evidence so far, I'm thinking they should be arresting people. Like, so how do
Yeah.
you get integrity back into these systems so that you're able to prevent these conflicts when the government seems to just want to agitate and agitate to provoke a response that gives them the justification to secure more power? And when it comes to resource, you have different opinions. You have those that want to get right onto green energy and oil's bad, all the petroleum products are bad. When you see the speed at which they're trying to institute this, the conflict is going to come. And I think at the very least, I'm surprised we haven't seen more Indigenous communities rising up to oppose a lot of things, but the system there doesn't necessarily allow for it with funding and the way things work. A lot of their voices are silenced. But, as someone who carried the charter for 20 years, I don't like the looks that I'm seeing as far as what rights we have to address, to have any kind of redress. And so when you can't take people to court and you can't get injunctions and it's all lopsided, the frustration is just going to build. And then when you look at the Indigenous communities, they're trying to build natural resources or gain access to some kind of development on their land.
Mm-hmm.
To have that restricted, you're taking that hope away, which is going to create a dynamic. Those who want, climate change, and those are like, we need to eat and have heating for our homes and jobs and employment and the ability for us to see a brighter future. So specifically with Indigenous communities, it's going to get pretty rough, I think, if Poilievre gets in. I hope he has more dialogue, and he seems to be pro-business, but you can't be just pro-business. You have to take both sides into account. And we often don't see that. It's just split right along the ideological lines.
Mm-hmm.
You don't agree with this, you're an enemy. That's just not how Indigenous people work, in my experience. Let's have that dialogue and see what we can find to work for everybody, but exploitation's happening on both sides.
I kind of agree most of that. Andy, when you were doing the convoy and you were meeting with them during this, did you ever get the impression from them that they didn't have a mission and they didn't have a goal or they didn't have a plan at all? Or was it just straight up grassroots and people just showed up in Ottawa and said, all right, now what do we do? Because what we hear from the OPS is that's what they thought happened. And when we hear from the OPP, they knew every step of the way. But within the convoy itself, what was the general feeling? Did people kind of feel organized and they had a mission, a safe, peaceful protest? Or was it really just a bunch of grassroots tagging along the way? What was the general sense for you?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Like, I wasn't involved in a lot of the inner circle of missions. Like, I knew Tamara and I knew Tom and, Tom Marazzo and Tom Quiggin. So, but I didn't have like a lot of those internal, I did talk to some of the road captains along the way. So it was a little bit of both. Like, it was an organized movement. Like I said, I talked to the road captains, met them in Calgary, things like that. So they did have a plan, but I don't think that anybody knew, and I don't think anybody, anticipated how big it was going to get and how powerful it was going to get. I started to realize, though, because I followed them from Calgary to the border of Saskatchewan. I didn't intend to. I just intended to meet them in Calgary. I just wanted to see what it was all about. But I was sort of enchanted with the people that I met. I was very, very alarmed by the reporting that was already coming out that was painting these people in a negative light. I ran the federal election. I'm a huge, believer in our democracy and the right to protest and our charter rights. So I was very, very alarmed by that verbiage that I saw coming out very, very early. And I felt that they were very, very vulnerable. And maybe a little bit naive, and they didn't realize that if this grew to be a powerful movement, which it did, how the things that they said may be used against them, and things that they did say, unfortunately, were used against them. Their memorandum of understanding, I do believe that they wrote it in a good-spirited nature, but I do think that it was written with a little bit of naivete, that they didn't understand the full implication of that and how that could come back to bite them later on, and it did. And that was where the whole, it's an insurrection that we're going to overthrow the government line came from. So I didn't intend to really, join in with them. But, once I met them and I was confident that, they were altruistic and good natured, and, they weren't a bunch of terrorists. I felt sort of that they needed and that they were vulnerable and that they could use all the coverage that they could get to help, insulate them a little bit and try to guide them. And I did make some recommendations that were controversial. Like I had problems when I met Pat King. I met him in Calgary. I was concerned about his state of mind, his stability, and his ability to, handle it and lead and be, you know, a, um, a good representative of what the convoy stood for. So I had concerns, and I said maybe you guys might want to think about removing him. And he did end up being a liability, and of course he did end up going to jail, unfortunately, right? So, I think in hindsight we all would have done things differently, right? But I think that it also points to the fact that nobody understood exactly what this was going to grow into. Right. I began to understand once, we were getting up to small towns near the border of Saskatchewan, and we still had, 50, 100 people all standing there in minus 20-degree weather with flags. I mean, we're talking about small towns in Alberta that were on the CB radio chat waiting for us to come through. And I thought, wow, this has got the potential to be big. Right. And so then I decided that, I should go to Ottawa and follow them to Ottawa. And I did. And tried my best to be fair and to debunk some of the stories that came out and things like that. A lot of the protesters had different medical views than I have, right? I'm vaccinated. But I did feel like they had a charter right to this demonstration and that right should be protected. So did my best. But like I said, I don't think it was, it wasn't like there was a whole bunch of undercover calls going on, like between us being like, let's do this and let's do that. I mean, it was chaos. I couldn't even get a hold of Tamara after that, that first talk that I had with her. It was just sort of, it was an avalanche. It steamrolled, right? It was a snowball that we pushed down a hill in BC. And by the time, we got to Ottawa, it was this massive thing. And I don't think anybody really foresaw it. So it was a bit of both. There was logistics and there was planning, but it was also very much, a fluid situation that people were trying to adapt with at the moment.
And I think you nailed it. And I think letting the rhetoric get away from them was something that really hurt everybody. There was passion, anger, frustration. And yeah, I think that MOU certainly upped the ante a bit, and it's definitely going to bite them in the butt. And that reminds me of Diagolon. So Diagolon, which was, kind of fringily involved, distant, they're memeing, but because of the rhetoric and the aggressiveness and some of the sound bites that can come from a group and a leader, it really, I think, hurts the entire purpose. I really liked the spirit of Dialog, which was to troll the government, to meme them, to even give them a fake boogeyman. I really like that. But the part that that hurt them is when they come up with some of that rhetoric and those sound bites, a little bit too much, because the average Canadian can stand up and say, yeah, we stand on guard for thee. It's in our anthem. So we will stand on guard for thee. And that could also mean our rights. So it doesn't necessarily mean a border. It also means our rights. But Canadians don't react well to negative rhetoric, especially violent or just way over the top. So to anybody else out there who's thinking about putting a grassroots group together, keep the language professional. Like let's keep it civil. You don't have to play the games. Sure, we're getting called names, and sure they're trying to provoke us, but don't fall into that provoke and play the same game. Passions were high, language was high. I can understand it, but I do agree with you, Andy, that whenever the rhetoric gets in there, it causes more problems than it solves. So I would love to see if there's any more rhetoric going forward. It's a lot calmer. Stuff out of Tom Marazzo was closer to what I would like to see from a leader, because he was keeping things pretty even keel. He was also firm. I think the only challenge there is he wasn't fully accepted and trusted. He has some background that may have indicated that maybe he has old connections or something. But unfortunately, with a grassroots group who doesn't actually have a leader, that's exactly what you're going to get. You're going to get good leaders step up, bring some ideas forward, but you're also going to get some resistance within that group as well. Why is he trying to calm us down? We need to be upset. So then you'll get some division around that. When, it's a really good idea to stay level-headed, talk to the PLTs, make as much movement and forwardness on your message as possible. So I didn't spend a lot of time with Pat King or going through his stuff, but I certainly heard some of the rhetoric, and I didn't see the value. I didn't see how that would help at all. But what we did hear from the OPP was zero assaults, zero crimes, no damage to the highways, all the way from the Manitoba border to Ottawa, not a problem. Yesterday, all they could bring up from memory was the crowds were quite large and it was crowding the roads. So there were safety concerns there. Good problems to have, because that is Canada showing their support. So yeah, that's where I came from on that one. Now, Kris, actually, I'm going to go to Wayne quickly, and then I'll come to Kris if you don't mind, Kris. Wayne, you've been watching quite a bit of this, and you've been seeing the finger pointing. Other than the OPP, how are you seeing the reputation of Canada be corrected? Because what we're seeing a lot of when we heard the first few days of testimony was Canadian residents are weak. The businesses are weak. It takes a small interruption to cause headaches for everybody. They're unable to tackle it themselves, and they definitely need a lot more help from larger resources. So other than the OPP coming out and saying, hey, look, we were there, they didn't use us properly. There was great intel that said this was going to be staying peaceful. It was going to last a while. So other than the OPP kind of trying to fix our reputation here, what else do you think Canada might need in order to come out of this inquiry with less of a victimization reputation and more of it was a big incident, you dealt with it, and it looks like nobody was going to be hurt. And sure enough, the government did overreact and use that EA, the Emergency Act, improperly. Do you think the OPP and other testimony will help our reputation internationally?
You hope so, don't you? I mean, all the protest videos that I saw, which were quite a lot. I mean, I'm not seeing it 24/7, but I mean, you guys saw everything down on the ground. So everybody was peaceful, shop owners were peaceful, but it's only the police that you're now hearing evidence from. So surely at the end of all this, you've still got your image intact. You know, there's no damage been done. As long as you can come through this and there's some sort of a corruption charge or something, because we spoke about that the other day, didn't we? You know, this is the kind of start to a possible corruption charge at some point in the future. So hopefully it lays the groundwork for that.
That actually is a great point. So if Canada came back and said, hey, look, not good, we did charges and really made a big deal about it, that I think you're right. That might actually help their reputation a bit. I just noticed that, Wayne, that you needed to go. Yeah, so thanks for sticking around for that last little bit there.
No problem. Thank you for having me. I'll catch
you
later.
Take care, Wayne. And Andy, there's a nice video of Wayne coming out. He's a victim of vaccine injury. So there's quite the story. And I'm sure one day Andy, Wayne, and I would like to get Dr. Mackis involved to have a conversation about that. So thank you, Wayne. And you take care and get some rest, my friend.
Will do. I'll be back later anyway. I just need to have something. No
problem. We'll talk to you soon. All right, Kris. Well, I'll quickly jump back to you now. Is there a way to recover our reputation? We keep saying the government has lost our respect, but I just want to clarify, the government is made up of our neighbors and us. We really want to focus on the leaders of the government, because that's where the problems, I think, really start to stem from. We had a federal whistleblower kind of give us the lay of the land when it came to the two classes of government, the elected class and a non-elected class. So it's very different. I'm getting audio from the inquiry, so if that starts up, I apologize to both of you. We may have to jump off. But go ahead, Kris.
Well, there's pillars to that, right? And so, first of all, as far as restoring reputation, well, the freezing of the bank accounts, as far as financial confidence from international markets, that is something that is completely separate from our, how we're viewed outwardly from the world. I think that, when we look at this government, it's their unwillingness to throw anyone under the bus. It is, for 2 years now, we've just seen scandal after scandal, and even with the WE scandal, the historical narrative is Bill Morneau resigned for other reasons, and it wasn't specifically, he had his other things he was going to do. So in order to, I think it would be wise for government, and that's kind of what we're leading to, is that if things continue with some of the veiled threats we've seen, we're probably going to see a round 2 of a convoy. And how that's handled will either restore or, cause tremendous harm. And I think that we're in a situation now where if you look at the chilling effect, all of the tactics the government's used has been things to deter people from even thinking about protesting. Right now, I would imagine there would have already been another convoy if it wasn't for the fear of people losing their bank accounts. Like, certain things are not being addressed publicly by our opposition or anybody as far as what exactly did you just do and the damage that comes from that. We can remove COVID, doesn't matter what it is. I don't think that any Canadian finds it acceptable to have your bank account frozen for participating or even sending a $30, $5 donation, just because the government needs to use certain, in my opinion, the government needed to use certain language and to be able to qualify the actions under the Emergencies Act and certain things with FINTRA. And we even saw that with Diane Deans. She was labeling the T word, for people that are out there, bounty castles. So we're in a situation where some of the things that can be done for the people that don't understand the full game, the optics wise, those things I believe will happen. Will we actually see intrinsic benefit on the ground? For me, that's why it's to know it's dark, but to keep moving, right? You'll find those glimmers of light through it, but we really can't predict what the next move is outside of we know everything's on the table with this government. There's no restriction, there's no empathy, there's no compassion. It's a matter of means to an end, and if you get in our way, right? And if we bring hot dogs, again, it's one of those things. It's the resilience, right? I think it's it started this round is going to cause a problem. When you have 82% of Canadians that are not fully in whatever the government's definition is today of up to date in your medical trials, you're dealing with a much larger population. I always thought we were. I think they use small numbers and they use, subversive coercion is definitely on the table. But, I think that we sent a message. I think our message, if you look at the way the majority, like the 90% that are looking at us, we have been an inspiration to people around the world standing up against this. So I think that we have already redefined who we are as a people. And I think some people around the world, you saw what's going on in the Netherlands and other things, they're taking some of our initiatives and probably a lot of countries, what's Canada got up their sleeve next so they can take a lead off of it. And I think that, as long as we're good inside and know that I'm a Canadian, free to speak my mind, the Diefenbaker quote, that is now considered extremist in our country,
right?
Which is a difficult place to be, but I think that we will work ourselves back. And then you look at the economic side, that's a nightmare. To get confidence back in our financial systems, that needs to be first. And the only way you can do that is to make sure that the bank account thing, which Freeland is some parts of it have made it permanent. If that's not addressed, it is going to be a consistent problem for us to get international responses.
Reputation back.
Investment, yeah. But I still think our reputation's good. Maybe not for our institutions, but as a people,
right?
They know what we're up to.
Right, and you made a good point there, the Conservatives. So there would have been no point to have a convoy if Peter O'Toole and the Conservatives were very vocal and very opposed to what was going on. I think the convoy itself was the result of our opposition failing us. They weren't even vocal enough to make us happy that there's even an opposition. We ended up losing O'Toole over it, rightfully so. And really the only real leader that we saw, doing stuff and helping and talking was Maxime Bernier, PPC. I think the convoy, politely rejected his offer to get involved, but we weren't seeing the actual opposition do anything. And sure, there's a Conservative opposition, but hey, where's the NDP? Where's the rest of our opposition? It's pretty, it's pretty clear there was no voice in the House, not loud enough, at least to the Canadian satisfaction, that there was going to be opposition to what's going on, because it did feel like we had to just take it. And I think that's where a lot of the grassroots frustration really stemmed from, was the fact that there was no voice. There was no voice really being loud about this. So we had no real choice. We had to do a grassroots opposition. I was proud of the convoy and their attempt, but I was sad that we had to do that, like that was necessary at all. So Andy, when you were doing some of your research and doing some of your stuff. What was your take on could the Conservative Party had made a statement or two before the convoy or as it was rolling out? Could they have pushed back harder, in your opinion, to Trudeau and his cabinet in the first place, so that we actually felt that there was opposition? Or do you think because of the situation, because we didn't know what was going on, that's kind of the way we could expect our government to run in those situations? Those are all kind of valid. Like maybe we had to go along with it, and that's why they did. But I personally, I don't get that impression. I think we knew a lot of the science, we knew a lot of the information, a lot of it's being validated now. So I think there was valid reasons to have strong opposition, and we didn't. So Andy, what do you think fell apart there? And is my assessment about that kind of correct, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. I don't think that there was any degree of elected opposition that would have given this particular group or movement a strong enough voice or push back hard enough against the Trudeau government that would have prevented it, though. Like, I think that it was an inevitability. And it was born out of sheer desperation, right? And that's partly why I joined. Like I said, I didn't necessarily, share all of their views, but I'm a strong believer in democracy and the right to protest. And when I went and met them, I didn't meet a bunch of defiant insurrectionists. Like a lot of these people were desperate, they were broken, they had lost their jobs. They had lost their trucks, right? People were making fun of them because there were so many pickup trucks. I was like, you don't understand. A lot of these people have already lost their vehicles and their jobs. Right? That's why we didn't have the big rigs. So, and my heart went out to them and I just thought, oh my gosh, these people deserve representation. They haven't gotten it. This is literally this was like their last stand. I was really, really happy to see them regain hope in their country as they traveled along and their movement got stronger and stronger. It gave them back, their confidence in that, we were going to be able to repair this for them. So, I don't think that there was any degree of representation. I don't think if Erin O'Toole had to come out swinging, I still don't think that they would have been able to rectify this. I think it was a necessary step and something that we had to progress through in our country to, get politicians standing up strongly behind us. And I don't think that support would have come in absence of this. So I think it was really, really good that the protests forced our politicians' hands and made them realize that they had to stick up stronger for our rights and freedoms in our country. And I think that, losing Erin O'Toole was a good thing for the party. I don't think that the Conservative Party would have, I don't think that they would have won an election or had a chance of winning an election had Erin O'Toole not have gone. So I consider that to be, I didn't have anything personally against Erin. I think he would have made a fair and good leader. But I think that, in these extraordinary times, he wasn't the leader that we needed. I think it was somebody different, right? We needed somebody with some fire under them. And that's definitely Pierre. I've met Pierre couple of times now. I've met all of the people who ran for the leadership race. I'm impressed with all of them, to be honest. And we did have Maxine on our side, and I've met Maxine too, like him. We have some differing views, and that's okay. I respect what he did. He was one of the first people to get on board, but we just didn't have representation that was going to stick up for us. And I think that, like I said, I think that this was like a step. It was a necessary step for the people of Canada to stand up and say, no, we're not returning back to pandemic measures. We're never going to go back there. And I think that we really had to make that very, very clear so that our health officials wouldn't slap down unnecessary restrictions on us. In the absence of good scientific proof in the future, I think that they're definitely thinking twice about that. Because I said I won't hesitate to drag another 1,000 trucks or farmers or whatever you want, right? I'll go block off a city in a heartbeat, right? If you try to put that back down on us, and I'm sure a lot of people would get behind it too. So, like I said, I wish it could have been avoided, but I think it just reached ahead, and it had to happen, right? Back to normal.
And I agree, and we have a new Canada now because of it. I don't think there'll ever be another push that hard. I think if this inquiry goes proper, the truth comes out, Canada will not accept another overreach like that again. And you bring up a wonderful point that we keep forgetting about. These aren't just protesters that went across the country because they weren't happy with the government action. These were actually individuals directly affected, lost their job, couldn't work, very desperate, trying hard to correct it. And I do want to say something to all the people out there that think the truckers were being whiny because they had a mandate like everybody else. That's not true. We have 4 ways of moving commercial goods in Canada: rail, sea, land, and air. Land, which is the trucks, were the only ones that had that mandate. So captains of the boats and the ships, train engineers, and pilots did not have that mandate. So it was only for the land crossing by truck. And you can ask all day long, why did they pick that particular group? Well, push them hard enough, they're going to get loud and they're going to drive their trucks. And the pilots, are you going to really attack the pilots? No, they're a small group. What are they going to do? You're going to attack the engineers? Are you going to attack the ship captains? No, again, small group. What are they going to do? But you attack the truckers with a mandate that makes no sense. They're in the cab by themselves. They've been doing it all along already. From the very beginning of COVID, we had exceptions for them, and they didn't spread it. They didn't cause super events or anything like that. So there was very little logic and medical reasons for doing it. But I can tell you, because I'm a pilot, I have my license, we were not mandated to take the vaccine. You could fly without the vaccine all day long. You can cross the border too all day long as a pilot. There was no restriction. There could have been restrictions for the airlines themselves on their pilots, but there was no restriction on the profession like there was for truckers. So I want to let people know that they were targeted. They were targeted for some reason. I don't think we'll find out in this inquiry why they were targeted, but there's no question that they were targeted. And because that group was able to respond so quickly, because, well, they need to work. They can't stop driving. It then caused, I think, the catalyst to really move this thing along fast. So I did thank you, Andy, for reminding us that there were actual people who had paychecks taken from them and had no other choice but to at least be heard. And they didn't have local representation, at least they didn't feel like it, doing that for them. Now, I do know that there was some MPs that just stepped forward. So I've been reminded here, Randy Hiller, and some others definitely did. I'm not saying none did, but what I do want to say is we didn't hear it loud enough, and it wasn't opposition enough to actually do anything. So that's kind of what I want to highlight there. Now,
question quickly.
Yeah, Kris, I was going to pass it back to you.
I've looked at, you go to 30,000 feet and you look at the hegemony, and I've read all the conspiracy theories and stuff, but there's 72 secret orders that this government put into play, and we need
72.
Yeah, cabinet orders, and we know that the military was involved and stuff. I'm wondering if 30, 40 years from now, we're going to find out one of those orders was in order to prevent hesitancy or to create public disinformation, that a lot of the MPs were gagged. That's total speculation.
You think they were gagged?
I don't know, because all provinces in PHAC dumped their pre-pandemic COVID plans, right? And so a lot of these measures were new. They had all of this stuff was lined up. They got their influencers in line. They threw money at the media. They needed this message. Mm-hmm. So let's just say, this was a genuine health emergency, and then, the population was at risk. It's a global pandemic. You don't believe everything. In order to prevent having those, because anybody who did got kicked out, like Baber and others, like anybody who tried to speak out, the parties tossed them. Mm-hmm. But there was very few MPs that spoke out. And I'll give credit to Leslie Lewis, because there was a few tweets, but then there was silence. And I started thinking, okay, the Conservative comes out, and then all of a sudden, boom, Twitter goes silent for a month. I think that, again, I'm not making an excuse at all. If I would have been kicked out, and if there was an order, I'd be in prison, because I come from a social work background. You don't do that to kids. You don't do that to seniors. You don't do that to your population.
Gotcha.
Unless you're a psychopath. But that's just my opinion. not a clinical one.
No.
But again, could it be that there was that? All of the media and everybody was saying the exact, because everyone references the script, right? And it just seemed like that. Well, just as important as the script is nobody going off script. So how do you control that without an executive order? Well,
it was a difficult time, right? Because at that time, even saying anything about vaccine hesitancy was enough to get you off of media and stuff like that. Yeah. So it was a tough navigation for them. Now, a question for Andy and Joe. I'm sorry if your audio doesn't work. Maybe we'll try that again another time.
No, I think we're good.
Oh, you do? Sorry. My bad. So next question is for Joe then. Joe, do you think independent representation might be something that we can start looking at? Because with this particular incident, if we had 2 or 3 independents per province who were very vocal and not being held back by whips or a platform, do you think that could have at least assisted with the voice being heard and at least give people a little bit more faith in additional types of representation other than traditional party representation?
Absolutely agree with that statement 100%. Independent representation now allows the government to truly be called into question. What we have here is no opposition. The people of Canada became the opposition because our federal opposition failed. All of our parties failed. Our entire governmental system failed us. If we had had true independent representation, accountability could have been demanded from the very beginning. And I'm not talking the beginning of this as in late 2020 when this was developing, or 21. I'm talking about from March 2020 when this whole debacle started, because it speaks to the total incompetence of the managerial level of government, from the city of Ottawa to the Valley region to the province of Alberta, province of Ontario, to the federal government. This was a complete example of incompetence on the managerial level. Again, we've seen it in the chat. We've heard it over and over again. More government, more incompetence. More people in jobs that all they want to do is just rubber stamp their work and get their paycheck, and they don't care. There's too many people governing Canada by committee as opposed to actual vote, law, act, and regulations that are for the common good and for Canadians. This government does not support Canadians. It supports globalists and other countries. Just take a look at what he tweeted out 58 minutes ago. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stated in a tweet from one of his media monkeys, "We'll continue to do whatever it takes to keep guns out of our communities," in relationship to banning handguns. You want to keep guns out of the communities? Start giving the police the power to actually deal with firearms criminality, and make sure the courts put people that use weapons in crime in jail for a very long time. That stops gun problems.
Here, here, Joe. Can we get you to run for prime minister? 100% agree with that, especially the globalist take on that. We are running out of time, Joe. I sincerely apologize for not having you on sooner. For some reason, I thought your microphone wasn't go.
No, it's working. Great chat. And just a quick segue to Kris. I think what you said was very articulately put through. The way protests are going to happen in the future are going to be very different. And I think we have an awful lot to learn from our First Nations brothers and sisters in how to proceed on doing what's best for Canada.
On that, thank you all very much. The commissioner is back. Let's meet again on Twitter and let's do this again. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Kris. Thank you, Joe. Have a great day.
Ready to go?
Bye-bye.
A great one.
Okay. Go ahead.
And if you liked this video, remember to like and subscribe and press that notification button to receive more information like this. You can also follow me at yellowhead.vote to stay informed and get the inside scoop. Thank you.